Welcome to everyone who is joining us for this webinar today, where we are going to be spending some time digging in on the tax conversation that is happening in Congress right now. I'm Ann Hedgepeth. I'm Child Care Resource America's SVP of Policy and Research, and I figured I'd use this opening portion of our webinar to talk a bit about the big picture, why we're doing the work, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues to tell you a little bit more about the specifics of the policy issue, what's going on, and how you can engage. So before we get into what we're going to cover through the webinar, let's talk a little bit about the context. First and foremost, we know that Congress is committed to working on tax policy immediately. That work is already underway, so it is happening and is happening now. There are specific tax credits that impact families, childcare programs, and employers that are at stake. And we really do have the opportunity to make the case for protecting and enhancing these tax credits. So on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about, working on tax credits, that impact childcare, and how that sits in a broader context that everything that is going on right now. First, many of you may know that yesterday was tough. It was a confusing day with news that there may be a freeze on federal funding that could impact childcare and early learning programs. We did hear about an hour ago that the memo ordering the freeze has been rescinded. And so in the short term, this is good news, but there may be more to come. In addition, and another piece of context that's really important to keep in mind is that there have been a number of executive actions that have been issued that are impacting our communities. And last, but certainly not least, Congress also has a funding fight ahead. We're operating under a continuing resolution and it expires in March. We have to work simultaneously on multiple fronts to make the case for childcare and for the incredible support that it provides to our families, our communities, and our economy. So rest assured, talking about and strategizing about childcare and tax policy today is not to ignore the other conversations and the advocacy efforts that we are all going to be taking on. It is so critical that we protect programs that support childcare and the children and the families that it serves wherever those programs are being discussed. So today we're going to focus on learning more about the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, learning more about what's happening in Congress, and we are going to leave with some tools to engage in this particular policy conversation. On the next slide, you'll see the overall case that we want to help empower you to be making, which is that Congress must protect and expand the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, which is the only tax credit that helps working families keep more of what they earn to pay for childcare. And you're going to hear us reiterate that over and over again today to really help drive home the point and make sure that we're all united in delivering this message to Congress. So moving on to the next slide, I did mention that this is a very timely conversation, and I did want to talk about why this is coming up, why it's coming up right now. Congress is prioritizing tax policy because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will expire at the end of 2025. And that means that they have to act very quickly. Republican leadership, which controls both the House and Senate, have made clear that this is their priority. And the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, which is the only tax credit that helps families with their child independent care costs and expenses, reaches millions of families. It provides a limited amount of relief for childcare expenses, and it really needs an update. So we have the opportunity to make the case. And we also have to stand firm and tell Congress not to cut the CDCTC. So when we think about the role we can play in delivering this message, we're going to have to think as organizations, partners, advocates, and a feel about how we talk about taxes as a piece of the equation when it comes to the childcare systems and what families, providers, and our communities need. So on the next slide, you'll see that, I've mentioned that the CDCTC is about getting families support. They get a tax credit so they can hold on to more of their earnings. Those earnings are being used for their child independent care expenses. But the CDCTC isn't a solution to all of the challenges that the childcare system faces. We're going to have to fight for this tax credit alongside other investments. And what that looks like to us is that we will be urging Congress not to cut the CDCTC. We'll be making the case for an update to or an enhancement of the CDCTC so that parents and families have more resources, all the while fighting for annual funding for our childcare and early learning programs so that we can grow childcare supply and we can provide more support to families. You'll see on this slide that you can really think of this as a yes and approach to talking about taxes and talking about the Child Independent Care Tax Credit. In addition, we'll be laser focused on the CDCTC. We understand that this tax bill will include a lot of issues. There'll be things that are helpful and things that are harmful. Working on the CDCTC and in urging improvements does not mean that we are going to be unconditionally supporting the full bill. It also doesn't mean that improvements to the CDCTC outweigh other changes that may impact families. It also doesn't mean that we will have solved childcare if we're able to improve the CDCTC, but it is a really important part of the equation. And that's because, and on the next slide, I want to talk about the sort of overarching story of how the CDCTC does play a big part in families' expenses and the way they manage their childcare costs. And truly, I believe we have an obligation to make a case for families and their childcare needs. The CDCTC is being utilized by millions of families, and they cannot go backwards and have less support for childcare tomorrow than they have today. We've also learned recently what can happen when you update or you enhance the CDCTC. In 2021, the Child Independent Care Tax Credit was strengthened alongside other supports for families like the Child Tax Credit, and families utilized this updated CDCTC. We saw 6.3 million families helped with an average credit of over $2,000, and this contributed to their overall economic security that year. This is a policy that works as a part of our larger equation for how we make childcare affordable and accessible. And so it's critical that we spend time working on and making the case for the CDCTC. So on the next slide, I want to briefly talk about what happens if we don't work on the CDCTC. And that's a track you'll see on the left. Threats to the Child Independent Care Tax Credit are not abstract. There's already been a discussion of eliminating the CDC completely, which would lead to less support for families. At the same time, and over the past few years, we've seen bipartisan support for expanding the CDCTC. Last Congress, we saw a number of bills introduced. And so there really is an opportunity here, which is why we have to make the case and make sure that Congress travels down the right track, supporting families with their childcare expenses. So to dig in a little bit more on the specifics, I'm going to hand things over to Sarah to take the next section.
Thanks so much, Anne. I'm Sarah Rubenfield, Managing Director of Government Affairs at the First 5 Years Fund. Thanks again to everyone who's joined us today. And I have to say, Anne, I couldn't agree more. We have to seize this opportunity that the 2025 tax debate in Congress provides to help make childcare more affordable for families. But it also means that we have a lot of work to do. So first, you might be wondering, what exactly is the Child Independent Care Tax Credit? And is it the same as the Child Tax Credit? So as Anne mentioned, the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, also known as the CDCTC, is the only tax credit that is specifically targeted at helping low and middle income working families offset the cost of childcare. As most of you know, childcare is a necessity for the 65% of children in our country who have all adults in their household in the workforce. We also know childcare is extremely expensive at roughly $11,582 per year. So expanding the CDCTC could help a lot of families struggling with the high cost of childcare. Millions, in fact. So how does it work? With the CDCTC, at tax time, parents can claim a percentage of their childcare expenses for children under the age of 13 on their taxes. Then they receive a percentage of those expenses back as a tax credit, which is great. It helps to lower the overall amount parents owe on their taxes. The problem is that, except for the temporary increase during the pandemic that Ann mentioned, the CDCTC benefit hasn't been updated since 2001. And we all know childcare expenses today are not what they were over 20 years ago. Right now, the current CDCTC provides an average annual credit of about $600 for one child, or up to $1,200 total for two or more children. Now, don't get me wrong, every little bit helps, but when childcare costs an average of over $11,000 a year per child, parents need more help. And the CDCTC is currently not refundable, meaning it can only lower your tax bill to zero. So for those families who don't make a lot of money or don't owe a particularly lot in taxes, they only get a fraction of the credit or nothing at all. So in a nutshell, the credit simply hasn't kept pace with the cost of care, not by a long shot. And low-income families who often need the most help don't get it. We can certainly do better than that. The CDCTC should be expanded by increasing the total or indexing it to inflation so that it can keep up with rising costs. And it should be made refundable to help more parents offset the high cost of care. And again, this big tax debate this year in Congress is the perfect opportunity to do just that. But again, you might be wondering, is this the same as the child tax credit, or how is this different? So this is not the same as the child tax credit, or CTC, which can be used to offset any costs associated with raising a child. And we all know it's expensive to raise a child. The CTC, the one most people have heard of, can go towards any childcare related expense. And we know that it most frequently goes to things like food, utility, rent, clothing, medicine, diapers, eggs, you name it. The CDCTC, the one we're talking about today, just focuses on helping to offset expensive childcare costs. And the bottom line is that parents need both. They need both credits. The CTC and the CDCTC were designed to work together. Congress only increases one of them, then they're really undercutting how helpful these credits can be in supporting working families. Now, that is why we must make sure that Congress doesn't forget about the CDCTC and instead expands it. Now, as part of the tax conversation, there are two other tax provisions that can help with childcare. In addition to the CDCTC, you also have dependent care assistance plans, which are offered by employers and allow working parents to set aside pre-tax dollars to pay for childcare expenses. Meaning parents can set aside up to $5,000 for childcare, not have to pay taxes on it. And then there is the employer-provided childcare tax credit, also known as 45F, which supports employers who want to help locate or provide childcare for their employees. Now, employers can either provide on-site care, but in reality, most employers aren't particularly interested in doing so. Or they can contract with a local childcare provider in the community to provide care. They can also work with resource and referral services to help employees find care. These provisions also need to be updated so that they can be more effective in helping to increase access to childcare. And while these tax provisions are also part of the ongoing conversation, the most important thing to remember is that these credits are most impactful when they work together. For example, Congress increases the employer-provided child care tax credit. That can help employers who want to be part of the solution and increase access to care. But it's critical that they also increase the CDCTC to help offset child care costs for employees, aka parents, at the same time. It's important that we tackle the tremendous child care challenges from both sides to really make an impact. So where are we today, and what is Congress doing? Well, Congress is working to figure out what will be included in the final 2025 tax package and what will not right now. I know it's only January 2025. We still have a very long way to go, but they are looking to see what will be included and what will not right now. Congress is trying to figure out how much a tax package might cost, meaning what federal tax credits or programs to possibly cut and which ones to expand. And that means they are deciding if things like the CDCTC will be eliminated or ignored, like it has been for the last 20 years, or if it will be expanded to support more working families. And as I said, they are doing this right now. So now is the time to tell your lawmakers to protect and expand the CDCTC. And the good news is that there is strong bipartisan support to increase the credit. Now, while there have been a few proposals floated lately that would potentially eliminate the CDCTC altogether, the good news is that as Anne mentioned, there have been multiple bills introduced together by Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate in the past year to increase the credit. And we've seen really strong support amongst voters in recent polling, with 78% of all voters supporting an increase, including 73% of Republicans and 86% of Democrats. So the bottom line is that now is the time lawmakers must hear from their constituents just how important it is to use this opportunity to help make childcare more affordable for families by enhancing the CDCTC. So now I want to turn it over to Daniel with NACI to explain exactly what each of you can do to help make that possible. Take it away, Daniel.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks, Anne, as well, for those great explainers. And thanks to all of you who are on the webinar for taking the time to connect with us on this important issue during what we know has been a really challenging week. I'll also ask for forgiveness if I sound a little nasally today. I'm battling a cold, so I appreciate your patience with me as I talk through my notes here. My name is Daniel Haynes. I'm the Managing Director for Policy and Professional Advancement at the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And as Sarah said, my goal during this webinar is to talk about how we can take action to inform Congress about the importance of the CDCTC. And Anne, reflecting on what you mentioned earlier as well, about the concerns and the challenges related to the OMB funding freeze announcement and then rescission this week. We've seen firsthand just in the last 2 days that strong and collective advocacy continues to be such a powerful tool in driving policymaker decisions. And our job is to make that advocacy easy for you as you're going about your work. And so after this webinar, you should receive immediately a useful link to explainers, messaging toolkits that can help you make the case for the CDCTC to members of Congress, including talking points, fact sheets, one-pagers, state data. And this is a message that we have provided that is very clear and easy to understand, urging members of Congress to protect and expand the CDCTC as the only tax credit that helps working parents keep more of what they earn to pay for childcare. Our organizations have also made it easy for you to take action right now while you're on this webinar to send a quick message to Congress about the importance of taking action on the CDCTC. And I'll drop that link in the chat as well. But these aren't the only things you can do. You can continue to build and develop relationships with your congressional staff and delegations. You can work with partners in your communities to advocate jointly and share these resources and opportunities for advocacy with your partners. I'll say for NACI's perspective, we're having our public policy forum at the end of February, where we're going to bring 400 early childhood educators to Washington, D.C. to advocate to Congress on a number of issues impacting young children and families. As Anne said, both on the spending side, the need to invest more in child care and early learning opportunities, but also on the tax side and where there are opportunities to both protect and expand critical programs like the CDCTC. The critical point today is that this is the time for us to spread action, and you have the opportunity to seize this moment. As Sarah mentioned, we know that there is strong bipartisan support for the CDCTC in particular to expand the credit. We have the evidence that we've discussed about the value of the credit and how enhancing the credit benefits working families even more. And we also know that we have the existing threats to the credit in the form of some of the proposed cuts. And so this is a critical moment for us to loudly and clearly, both ourselves and with our communities, stand up and say that this is a critical part of the child care solution for families and for communities, and that we need to ensure that Congress, as they're debating a broader tax package that, again, is likely to include things that we do not support and that don't align with our goals, should also be considering things that they can do to better support families, better support early childhood educators, and better support young children. And so we're continuing to work on all levels to ensure that child care and early learning is supported in congressional conversations, and this is such a critical part of those conversations. So thank you all for being here, for taking these actions. We encourage you to join our networks and our memberships to learn more about how you can take action and continue to work.